Hi there, I'm here with Matt Knox, the acting department head at Kansas State for their School of Architecture and Design. We're here to talk about how digital architecture is affecting the architectural education. Matt, thank you so much for speaking with us.
My pleasure.
We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So, Matt, you've actually become somewhat of a star in the architecture community, sending out students and have trained them to a certain extent to use video and film, or at least film standards in how they create a presentation to talk about architecture. Can you tell us a little bit about what you emphasize in those classes?
Sure. About 10 years ago when I started doing this, I had a real hatred of the architectural fly-through because it was always,
absolutely
it was always to me like
bore you to death.
A really bad home video, and that seemed to be all the craze. And it occurred to me that if you were going to be doing an animation, you were making a movie. So why not use the language of film to make your movie? So I started off teaching some courses where it's actually more animation or actually video based, and the students would come up with stories and we'd shoot them and edit them, and we'd use stuff like David Mamet's On Directing book as a kind of a Bible for the way we thought about things. So you tell the story in the cut was always a big part of it. And then we started moving from learning those skills, then they would start applying it to their animations and so forth. Okay. So we started off by doing these films that were mostly live action at the time. And then once the students started learning the skills of directing and editing and cutting, they began to introduce animations into those things. And we even did a few things. One of our first experiences was actually a mix between live action and animation, but we were able to integrate them into separate shots and actually create a fairly interesting story out of that. And then after that, we started to get better at character animation. And so I think one of the most exciting things we did, we spent a whole year, and the students were asked to actually divide them into teams, 2 separate short films that involved architecture and a story. And that one was pretty fun because I started it off on the premise that a film director is like an architect.
Yes.
And it's really the same kind of thing. It's all about visualizing an idea, and so obviously the director's job is to visualize the script and tell the story with pictures. And so we came up with the script, and it was a story about a monastery and an architect, of course, and the students are asked to, in a way, act as film directors and design the sets or the architecture for the movie. So they designed the monastery, and then they began to design the characters. They didn't know anything about animation at the time, so they actually had to figure out how to animate the characters.
Yes.
and do all that. And this is a full year endeavor, and at the end of it, they ended up with 2 really, really good films that explored not just architecture as a design thing, but architecture as something that's part of the story. So if they had a significance or a meaning to their script, they tried to design that into the visual story and how the architecture responds, just like a film art director does on a film. And so I think that was probably the most successful we've been at that point.
Film and directing, the whole idea of how to produce a movie has actually worked its way into the architectural education now in order to help them tell a story, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's really taken off. I think I was kind of ahead of the curve a little bit at the beginning, and now it's been fun to go to conferences and see it being discussed more and more. And it's like, yeah, this architectural film thing's a really fantastic thing. What I've noticed is that the students have really, they're always a little skeptical at first when you're talking like a film director and so forth, but they very quickly figure out that it's really all about design, and what they're doing is no different than what the other studios are doing, but it's got a twist to it, and I think it creates a lot more excitement in the studio because it allows them to express themselves in media that they're not necessarily used to using.
Yeah, and I found that in the profession, You know, you definitely, when you're trying to sell $100 million idea, you know, or $1 billion idea, as far as what a complex or what a giant building should look like, you've got to be able to tell the story about what that place is going to be. Yeah. And so, yeah.
Well, one of the interesting things that I discovered very quickly was in design studio, the students often design the big picture of things. They don't really get into the details of things. What I noticed quickly happening is, since they were shooting a shot and everything was visible in the shot, they suddenly had to design everything in the building. So they couldn't just...
It forces you to think about
it,
doesn't it? They couldn't
just draw a line. They actually had to design the step or the table that was in there. And I think what it did is it ramped up their ability to think holistically about the architecture.
That's excellent. So it sounds like film's becoming a very big part of the education. Do you ever worry about it taking over?
No, I think we're here at K-State, one of our biggest ways we like to work is that we keep ourselves open to many different things. We never try to nail it down to one single thing. I think what makes us a good architecture program is that our students leave here understanding more or less how to make a building. And I think what we need to do is provide them the tools to do that, obviously, which are always constantly changing, so we always want to be adaptive. But really what we're teaching them is how to think as architects and to grow in the future. You know, part of what we're doing is graduating people that aren't quite ready to be architects, and they have to keep going in internship and so forth, and they turn into architects eventually.
Absolutely, it's a long process to learn how to become the building master.
Yes, and I think what we need to do in terms of whether it's parametric modeling or any of these things is we want to make sure that we're not just training to that, we're actually training them to go beyond that in the future. So film's part of it, parametric modeling, fabrication, the CNC, the 3D printing, all of those things are really important, and I think we've got to keep those in perspective, that it's really all about making the building, and these are just part of the tools that we use to do that.
Well, Matt, it sounds like you guys are doing a great job here.
Well, thank you.
It was so nice to be able to sit down with you. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you.